Good morning, everyone. So I'm Matthew Platten. I work for Channel IT, where I take care of the operations. Okay, I've been working in the fraud management business now for about 15 years, and today we will be speaking about quite an interesting topic, which is why is phishing actually downshifting targets and starting to attack not anymore only tier 1 banking infrastructures, but also tier 2 and tier 3 bankings. So here you have all my contact details, and I hope to see you later in our virtual booth. So let's start with this very interesting subject. So to start with, a number, 80%. 80% is the proportion of the phishing threat compared to the global threat faced by any financial institutions today, which means that out of 100 different attacks that you are seeing, 80% of those attacks are targeted around phishing activity. And there is a reason to it. If you think of all the successful attacks targeting financial institutions today, let's think about HSBC, Halifax, but also non-financial institutions such as Marriott, for example. All those attacks were started by some phishing activity. And what we are seeing inside this fraud cycle is that we have a shift in the targeting. Typically, very highly engineered phishing attack, and I'm not speaking there of the good old Nigerian prince sending you an email to share his millions with you. I'm speaking of very highly engineered phishing attacks, and we will see the methodology of those phishing attacks a little bit later. All those very highly engineered phishing attacks are not targeting tier 1 banking anymore, but are downshifting to tier 2 and tier 3 banking. There is a reason to it. Tier 1 banking has been very susceptible to those attacks since many years. And by now, most of the world's leading financial institutions, and I'm speaking of HSBC, JP Morgan, Nova Scotia, etc., have put together some extremely resilient infrastructures in order to fight the highly engineered phishing. And so those banking institutions are not longer an interesting target for fraudsters. So what fraudsters are doing is that they are starting to look into how to leverage highly engineered phishing activity targeting tier 2, tier 3 bank. And recently I do not want to give specific names there, but recently we have seen a lot of this activity in Cyprus, where I am right now, but also in Greece and also a lot in Eastern Europe. So let's look at the typical methodology of an attack through a typical fraud case, and then we will see how tier 1 and tier 2 banking can mitigate at a very low expense with a very high level of efficiency those kinds of attacks. So when we speak about phishing, everything starts with a rogue email. Okay, so there is different kind of rogue emails, but all the rogue emails do have some common characteristics. And the first characteristic of a rogue email is a spoof of identity. A rogue email will always pretend, while targeting one of your consumers, to come from your banking infrastructure or your financial institution. Okay, there is two different ways of doing it. Either they just pretend to be by saying, we are Bank of World. Okay. Either they would proceed in a domain spoofing attack, which can also be defeated, of course. The second common element is that there is always a threat in those emails. Okay. Dear customer, your account will be closed if you do not click on this specific link, or there is a problem with your account, or you have just won 1,000 euros, click on this link, or you will lose them. This is also a threat. It's more a pull than a push threat, but it's still a threat. And then the third common element, of course, is a malicious link, which is usually quite smartly misshapen in order to entice the consumer to believe that he's actually clicking on a legitimate link coming from his bank. So this is the first stage of the fraud cycle. This is typically where there is a baiting of the customer, the real phishing activity that starts. Okay. So once the client click on this link, it is typically sent to a specific website. This specific website will usually be a very good replication of the original website. Okay, typically this is obtained via website scraping, which is a very common kind of attack where the fraudster would actually access the legitimate bank website, will make a copy of this bank website, will re-engineer it in order to integrate his attack, and then will host it on compromised WordPress website. We are all IT security professionals here, so it's not a big secret to say that compromising a WordPress website is usually about 5 minutes work. Okay, so then the attack is launched. And the typical first stage of the attack is a credential harvesting. So the customer will be enticed, believing that he's on his legitimate website, to provide his credentials. So we will have a fake login page where the client will enter his login and his password. Once this is done, the attack is initiated, but it is far from being finished, because the fraudster, when he gets the login and the password, knows that the person connected is actually really believing to be on their legitimate bank website. So the fraudster is then going to start milking this client. He's going to start getting more and more information. So typically the second stage would be a credit card information harvesting, where the fraudster will try to get credit card information from the consumer. There is multiple good reasons to do this. One of the reasons is that this credit card information can be sold online for a lot of money. And then the third stage of the attack would be an SMS OTP information for harvesting. And there is a reason to that. Most of the tier 1, tier 2 banks in the world are still using SMS OTP validation for their customers, which means that, as you know, when a transaction needs validation, the bank infrastructure would send to the client a 6-digit SMS with an OTP. And this OTP will be used by the client in order to validate his identity. So the fraudsters will create a transaction and then wait for the client to validate this transaction with his SMS OTP. And the fraudster participating in the transaction poisoning in the background will validate his fake transaction with the SMS OTP provided by the client. This is an attack known as transaction poisoning. So how does this work? Well, it's very simple. First thing, the fraudster, once he gets the login information, would log in the legitimate web banking website, or will resell the credit card information, or will create a merchant transaction directly on the fly with the credit card information. And then will wait for the consumer directly on the phishing website to validate the transaction poisoning or the merchant transaction by giving the OTP that will just be copied on the legitimate banking website in order to validate transaction. It's an extremely simple methodology of attack, but it has proved over the years that it can be extremely efficient as long as the initial email and the banking website are properly replicated. So this is the attack. Okay, this is what we see the most commonly happening in Europe, but also in Africa, in Middle East, in Southeast Asia, in United States, wherever. There is simple and efficient solutions in order to totally block the possibility of this kind of fraud. So let's see how it works. Blocking this kind of phishing is obviously a no-brainer for financial institutions. Some financial institutions did not yet put efficient measures in place in order to block this. And I really deeply think that this is a mistake, because it's an absolute immediate return on your investment. Putting in place this kind of security provides a lot of things. First, obviously, it makes it much easier to prevent losses, because the protections available against those kinds of attacks are extremely efficient. The second element is that it not only protects for financial losses, it also protects for what we call intangible assets. An intangible asset we are all aware of, obviously, is a financial loss by degrading the image of your financial institution. I remember the time when DMARC, which is an email validation protocol, was launched in 2012. Google and PayPal started working together in order to create this protocol that makes it impossible to send fake emails, spoofing the email identity, of course. The reason why PayPal created this protocol with the help of Google is that consumers were getting so many emails coming directly from PayPal that they had no possibility to make the difference between an original PayPal email and a spoofed email. And people started distrusting PayPal and started dropping activity on PayPal. And PayPal nearly went bust because of this. Another element is the factor of deterrence. Fraudsters work on targets. Okay, they know that if they attack one specific bank of world, they are going to have a yield between 1 and 2%, for example. So they are going to invest time, they're going to invest activity in order to launch this phishing attack. And they know that they will have statistically a certain return. If this return is not there, then it will be a waste of time for them and for their limited resources to attack specific institutions, because they know that if they attack this bank of world, they will not get any results and their phishing attack will be taken down too fast. And this is basically what happens. Another element is that when you are seeing an attack, of course, you need to investigate on this attack, and investigation overhead has a cost. So diminishing the number of attacks obviously diminishes the investigation overhead. So all the finality of this is that you will see a reduced attack volume by deploying this technology. You will block the existing attacks, and the number of new attacks launched against your financial institution will dramatically decrease. And this is what we can help you achieve with different technologies. The first technology I'm helping to do this is a digital threat protection suite. This is what we call threat landscape analytics. A technology allows you, sorry about this, technology allows you to survey in real time multiple elements around your brand. So this means thousands of social media websites, because social medias are now used in order to launch phishing attacks. Hundreds and hundreds of mobile application stores, because fake mobile applications are also used in order to launch phishing attacks. Search engine for fraudulent malvertising, okay, because Google AdWords, for example, are used in order to launch phishing attacks now. We also monitor dark web stores, because the dark web is being heavily used by fraudsters, either to collect some information, either to resell compromised credit card numbers. And of course, we monitor your websites and all your infrastructure. This allows us to find the phishing activity before this activity is actually launched. We can detect phishing activity in the preparatory phases of the activity, including the scraping activity of your original website. This also allows us to move for takedown. Takedown is very important, because when a website, a fraudulent website appears targeting your institution, you will want to remove this website from the web. Okay. The problem is that removing websites takes time. An effective takedown provider such as us will probably remove your website between 1 and 3 hours. Okay, and this is a very good score. But we all know that phishing attack peak of efficiency is around 45 minutes to 1 hour. So a second technology which is also very interesting to deploy is what we call victim insight, or the victimization technology. The interest of this technology is that we have the technical capability of surveying the phishing website activity in real time, which means when a phishing website pops up and starts targeting your customers, what will happen is that we will put this phishing website under surveillance. And via our technology, we will be capable in real time to tell you which one of your customers is actually connecting to this phishing website and what are the credentials or information being communicated to this customer by this customer, on the phishing website, which will allow you to invalidate this information on the fly. Once again, this will drastically diminish the yields of the phishing website for the fraudster and make you very interesting from a target perspective. So how does this work? Let's consider a time escalation scale, okay? So T0 a real-time detection system is capable of providing you with the detection of a phishing website using a technology which is called domain monitoring. So phishing website is detected. Alert is launched via our SOC to your SOC, directly either via a portal, via an API, or via email. Before you react, we already collect all the compromised information, credentials sent by your customers to this phishing website via our victim insight technology. The compromised credentials are then retransferred to your infrastructure in real time, so you can mitigate and start blocking this phishing activity. Also, in the case of compromised credit card credentials, all this information is collected and sent back to your financial institution. So there also you can start invalidated compromised credit cards. And finally, AppGate can start moving for takedown measures. So even before the takedown is actually initiated, we are already capable of blocking the activity of the fraudsters. This is the first stage, and this is the threat analytics. Okay. Now there is extra elements you can put into place in order to mitigate more complex attacks, such as the one we described. And the second point is actually endpoint protection, okay, which would address the setup and launch part of the fraud cycle of the phishing attack we discussed. So endpoint protection comes in two flavors. We have on one side a clientless technology that can be deployed on websites, either mobile website, either normal computer websites, without any client software needing to be installed on the consumer's computer. And then we have a second flavor, which is an SDK, which is deployed at the level of your mobile APKs. This provides a very good insight into the phishing activity, and they're also in real time. It provides very high level target attack detections, provides malware snapshots, which means when a malware is targeting the session between your consumer and yourself, we are capable of detecting this malware activity and providing you snapshot of the information targeted by this malware. And of course, we provide also very high level contextual analytics. This technology is also capable of providing intelligent real-time monitoring and control on all the sessions between your consumers and yourself. Because every time a consumer uses either the web banking portal, either your mobile APK, sorry, this consumer becomes de facto an extension of your own network, and you need to protect the device which is used in order to drive transactions with your institutions. Another interesting element of this technology is that we also provide heuristics which can monitor the behavioral attitude of the client, the way the client moves his mouse, the way he clicks on the keyboard, in order to verify that this is indeed the client that we have on the other side. This technology can also provide a very high tolerance control directly from the interface. You can decide what will be the condition of the mobile device which is doing business with you. You can block rooted phones if phones have a debug enable mode, if they are connected to insecure networks. If the phone is face down, it can also be blocked. If the phone is running off a simulator, we all know how rat attack works. We know that fraudsters using rat attacks directly from mobile phone use simulators because they need to emulate hundreds of phones at the same time. This can be detected and blocked directly via the use of our SDK technology. We can also detect and block farming attacks, also repackaged apps, because you know that very often what would happen is that a fraudster would source your legitimate app, modify the code inside, repackage it, and try to send it back to your consumers in order to corrupt the banking transactions. So all this can be very easily detected and blocked with this technology. So how does this work? Let's say that a customer connects with his mobile phone directly on your infrastructure. We would detect with the SDK that the client is connecting to a fake phishing website. Automatically, this SDK will inform the threat watch list, sorry, of this fake website. And your bank will have the capability to distribute this information notice to absolutely all your clients. So in a matter of seconds after this phishing website being detected, none of your clients will have the capability to connect directly to this phishing website. Okay, this is actually a common use of the threat detection among all your clients, and it is distributed by your mobile application featuring the SDK, allowing this manipulation. Third element, it's authentication. So there also, authentication is a topic which is moving a lot at the moment. Okay, we all know regarding the type of authentication factor that we use, we all know that password is dead. Okay. Connecting using a login and a password to an infrastructure doesn't make any sense, because login and password is the most insecure way somebody can actually connect to a resource. Okay, and there is many reasons to it. First reason is that everybody has multiple accounts with multiple passwords. Okay, which means what happens? Everybody uses the same password for all their accounts. The second element is that those passwords have values, so they are a high-priced target for fraudsters. Okay, passwords are being resell every day on the dark net. Then we know that 80% of the breaches are carried out with stolen credentials. If I manage to procure the login and password of a sensitive resource and we don't have any second factor behind, once I'm in, the system belongs to me. And then, of course, most citizens' identity have already been compromised anyway. So, which means that when you onboard a customer, you will onboard him with a login and a password. This password will be chosen, for example, by the customer. He will already be using a password that has already been compromised. So how can we do if login and password is not longer a way to authenticate yourself? Well, we provide modern authentication for modern users. Okay. We have the capability to deploy advanced factors, a proper unified integration among those factors, a comprehensive security for all the channels, and all this with a very easy integration. The way we do this is that we provide our customers, and this is hundreds of financial institutions in the world, a complete authentication framework. This security service allows customer preference, which means that the customers have the capability to choose what factors they want to use on the fly. Okay, and it also provides a very strong factor authentication framework, which means that multiple factors can be used for multiple kinds of authentication using multiple channels on multiple resources, all centralized in one authentication framework for our clients. And this framework is easy to deploy and perfectly compatible with all the existing resources of your institution, which means that you can completely unite and federate all your means of authentication for your internal users, but also for your customers via the same framework. Two of the favorite factors of authentications we recommend, of course, are facial recognition and fingerprint scan. The reason that those two factors are favorite is that consumers are already used to using those kind of factors. Every single customer with an iPhone will use face recognition. Every single customer with a Samsung phone will use fingerprint authentication. So this can be easily leveraged by your financial institution in order to authenticate customers. Of course, in some cases, you may not wish to use the authentication method of the customer, either face, either fingerprint, or you just want to use your own push capabilities. Okay, the push capabilities called push authentication is also integrated inside this framework, which means that if a customer creates a transaction, you will receive this transaction and you have the possibility to send a secure encrypted push message notification directly to the mobile phone of your customer. this notification can be completely dynamically customized with the elements of the transaction. So the customer will receive a message with your logo in color saying, do you approve the transfer of 1,000 euros from your account to the account of Mr. Andreas? It's perfectly possible. And then the client can validate the transaction, or you can also automatically require, for example, fingerprint or selfie authentication. And by doing this, you will totally eliminate the possibility of OTP phishing. Right now, a lot of financial institutions already do some push notification and some second factor authentication with their customers via SMS. So what happens is that when you send an SMS, what you do is that you send the SMS and you have a sending confirmation. And the client will receive a simple SMS message saying that 1,000 euros was transferred from account A on Bank of the World. Okay, the message, of course, can be customized, but you do not have any traceability on this message. The Detect ID push notification provides a secure communication between you and the mobile phone of your customer. This is not SIM dependent, on the contrary of an SMS, because if you send an SMS, the person receiving this SMS is the person who actually has the phone number. If the SIM is stolen and put in another phone, they will receive the validation SMS. If the SIM is actually cloned, the fraudster will receive the OTP, will receive the notification SMS or the validation SMS. Detect ID is not dependent on the SIM. Detect ID is dependent on the digital fingerprint of the mobile device being used by the client. And it also does carry authentication and identity verification capabilities. So when you send a confirmation via Detect ID instead of using an SMS, the client will receive the message. You will have a sending confirmation exactly like an SMS, except that you have a traceable transaction ID. All the transactions are signed, okay, with integrity and non-repudiation capabilities. And then behind you will receive a confirmation with the same factors, which is non-integrity, non-repudiation and encryption. Okay, for the confirmation, you will receive read confirmation, and you will also receive message acknowledgement by the receiver. So this is a huge step and a huge advantage compared to the normal SMS validation, because banks have been using SMS OTP validation for years now, and the amount of phishing activity defeating SMS is growing, because SMS was never meant to be an authentication factor. SMS is not secured. Push notification encrypted is. This capability for authentication, endpoint protection, digital threat protection can be completely integrated inside your existing resources, website, APK. So this concludes my presentation for today. This was a very short presentation. We barely scratched the surface of the capabilities of those solutions. I could go on talking about what those solutions can do for financial institutions for hours. So if you are interested in knowing more, or if you are interested in having an informal conversation with me about the state of phishing, the state of fraud today, please visit us on our booth, visit our website. You will have a copy of this recording, I guess. You have all my contact details. Do not hesitate to call me, to drop me an email. And I wish you a very, very pleasant and informative visit on this virtual event.